also overseas, because this is something that will have implications for the wider world too. The machinations in United States politics and indeed the latest indictment and mugshot of former President Donald Trump. Let's speak now to Lanny Davis, the former special counsel to President Bill Clinton and the lawyer representing Donald Trump's former lawyer, Michael Cohen, in the Stormy Daniels case. Lanny, thank you so much for making the time for us this morning, rather earlier for you in New York. So thank you for getting up for us. I suppose, first of all, you, of course, represented Bill Clinton in a number of sticky situations when he was president. How does Donald Trump's trials and tribulations compare to some of the legal difficulties of Bill Clinton?
So there's obviously some dispute about this statement, but Bill Clinton faced a political situation involving a relationship with a young woman. There was never anything illegal. He was accused of committing perjury, so that was a legal charge, but he actually told the truth and he testified before the grand jury. Unlike Donald Trump, who refused, the grand jury is set up as a jury to determine whether someone should be indicted. He not only agreed to testify, he testified on national and international live television and told the truth about the relationship, which of course was very embarrassing for him and his family. So it wasn't a legal issue, it was a political issue. This is a legal issue. 4 separate grand juries picked from citizenry, similar to Great Britain's system, voted after hearing evidence for indictments, meaning probable cause that crimes have been committed. So they're vastly different situations.
Now, of course, you're involved in the Stormy Daniels case in New York, so perhaps we won't go into the details there. But why is it that some people say that the Georgia indictment is the most politically dangerous for Donald Trump?
Well, the Georgia indictment is a brilliant use of a statute passed many years ago to capture and convict organized crime families, where you couldn't get individuals because they were all sworn to silence, but you could allege an enterprise, a conspiracy, and using that device called a RICO, Racketeering Influence Corrupt Organization Act, the organized crime families in New York were convicted by none other than Rudy Giuliani, who's now being indicted. It's kind of ironic. So that's the criminal statute that the Georgia prosecutor has utilized. And just to remind your British viewers, Donald Trump claims to be running for president so he can get elected and pardon himself. So even if he's convicted, he can pardon himself and he will never have to suffer. That doesn't apply in the states because we have state governments different from the federal government. He can't pardon himself from a conviction of a state crime in Georgia or the one that I'm involved in New York. If he's convicted of either of those jurisdictions' crimes, he cannot pardon himself. And after he's president, if he's elected, God forbid from my perspective, he will go to prison or at least will be convicted if the jury determines that, because he cannot pardon himself.
It is fascinating to see that as these indictments have sort of piled up, as the charges have piled up against Donald Trump, indeed as his mugshot has been taken at a county jail, as this has happened, amongst Republicans, Donald Trump's favourability seems to have risen. His poll ratings amongst Republicans seem to have risen. Clearly, there is a large proportion of voters in the United States who believe this is nothing more than a political prosecution.
Well, first, let's do the math, and you'll decide whether the word large is an accurate word. In the United States, if you ask any sample of the population, about 30% of the population of America will say they're Republicans. About 30% will say they're Democrats. Interestingly, they're about equal. And the rest, about 40%, call themselves independents. They're the swing voters that really determine the general election for president. So if you take the 30% that identify themselves as Republicans, then polls will show 90% will stay with Trump no matter what. Now do the math. 90 times 30 is 27% of America. And that leaves 63% not voting for Trump. So the large is only large as part of a minority. And you have the same issue in Great Britain, where you have parties and percentages, but they don't represent the general electorate who votes for members of parliament. So that's really the difference in America, too. He still is got a ceiling, and he's not likely to capture those swing voters, those independents, if he's indicted and he does what he does, which is to play with the truth. And that mugshot is not exactly a mugshot that will win swing voters. It will win that 27% hard Republican base, but not much beyond that.
But why is it that that's 27%, that those who identify with the Republican Party, who have registered as Republicans, why is it that they are so convinced that this is a political persecution, that these are political decisions, that perhaps particularly, most notably in New York, this is dredging stuff up from the past to go after a political opponent, in their view?
So forgive my disclosed bias. I'm the lawyer for Michael Cohen, who worked for Donald Trump for 10 years. He went to prison pleading to what you just, and I'm not criticizing you, you're reflecting American journalism, described as a political prosecution involving a porn star. So it's about sex and it's really not serious. Let's remember that the federal prosecutors working for Donald Trump in New York, federal prosecutors of the federal government, the federal Justice Department under Donald Trump, prosecuted Michael Cohen for exactly the same crime of paying someone to stay silent so the American people didn't know about the affair. They called that crime a serious danger to democracy, and they sent Mr. Cohen to prison. Now, Trump didn't say that was a political prosecution. Cohen was targeted, the only person prosecuted in this whole organization, and the federal prosecutors working for Donald Trump. This is a fact in writing, in public, said Donald Trump directed Michael Cohen to do that crime. So how can it be political for Donald Trump when he directs Michael Cohen and he goes to prison for the crime, where it's not political if you say, Mr. Trump, you directed somebody to do a crime before you were president, we're going to prosecute you.
I suppose some might say that by extension, going after Michael Cohen was also a political move. But of course, this is all.
He pled guilty. Excuse me for interrupting, but he wouldn't. Even Michael Cohen wouldn't agree with you. He pled guilty because it was a crime. It wasn't political. He paid money to keep somebody quiet to influence an election. There is a statute in America that says if you do that, if you pay someone to stay silent to influence an election, that's a crime. Michael Cohen pled guilty. There's nothing political about it. He violated the law and he pled guilty. The really ironic question is that if Donald Trump, according to his own prosecutors, let me repeat, these are prosecutors working for Trump during the Trump administration, indicted and forced Michael Cohen to plead guilty. If he was directed to do that crime by Mr. Trump, there's nothing political about Mr. Trump being held accountable. That's what the New York case is about.
No, it's a fascinating situation where you have almost two different parallel narratives living in the United States. Do you think that Donald Trump could actually end up behind bars, could actually be in a prison at the end of this process?
So let me just answer. I know we're running out of time. First of all, thank you for inviting me. I'm an Anglophile. I wrote my thesis about Winston Churchill being right on Gallipoli. Those of you who are historians will know that most people disagree with that view, but I'm a great fan of the UK, and I say hello to all my friends. So first of all, I am not in favor of a former president being put behind bars. I am strongly critical of Donald Trump. But I believe it's very important in Great Britain, and our system is modeled and derived from common law in the UK. Every person should be held to the same standard, whether you're, as we say over here, no man is above the law, but we mean no person because no woman is above the law. So the principle that he should be held accountable for violating the same crime that Michael Cohen committed, when he deletes tape of national security information, our nuclear program he had and took with him, and he didn't hold it in security, and then he deleted the tapes showing that, that's a crime. At least he needs to be tried and held to the same standard. So the principle is no man is above the law, no woman is above the law, but I'm not in favor of putting him in jail I'm in favor of the principle that we're all the same, whether you're a former president or a citizen.
That's a fascinating distinction. Not to go in prison, presumably some form of house arrest you'd favour there. But a really interesting point to raise there. Someone so implacably opposed to Trump, not thinking he should actually end up behind bars. Thank you for sharing your thoughts. And I hope that, well, at least I've done my best to put across challenging points that the Republicans in the United States are saying. And I hope that we've got both sides of the story there.
Thank you very much for inviting me. And good morning to all my friends in the UK.